whether you're blissful or you're depressed. Awareness is exactly the same in both of those states, both of those experiences. Awareness doesn't expand like consciousness does. Consciousness can expand, and you can have an experience of expanding across the whole universe, if it's, profound. And you can also have the experience of coming back from that and having your consciousness come back into a very limited domain. But awareness is exactly the same, whether your consciousness is expanded or even contracted. Nisargadatta also uses the word absolute. To him, the absolute and awareness are the same thing. He uses them interchangeably. The difficulty, as I said, with Nisargadatta's teachings, if you've got to enter into his way of using these words, because the way that we usually are taught to use these words, like I said, we use consciousness and awareness interchangeably, if they're the same thing. And you have to let go of the way that you're used to thinking about, especially thinking about awareness. Even the way that most spiritual teachings talk about awareness. You have to let go of that context in order to begin to enter into the way that Nisargadatta is using this word. He's using it to some extent in a similar way that some Zen teachings might refer to the void. In fact, he refers at times as awareness or the absolute as being completely void. I've defined it, I think, in the last program and also in a number of emails of my experience, and my way of defining the absolute or awareness is an absolute pure potential. It's absolute pure potential. This potential is aware, but it's absolute pure potential. It's, if you can imagine a potentiality that's infinite, but hasn't become anything. It hasn't even become big or small or anything you could describe it as. It's just infinite potential. And actually, I did find a quote where Nisargadatta also refers to it as potential, potentiality, which I thought was really kind of interesting. Here's another quote by Nisargadatta. Maybe we'll hone in on this distinction a little bit more. Awareness takes the place of consciousness. In consciousness, there is the I. Who is conscious? While awareness is undivided, awareness aware of itself. The I am is a thought, while awareness is not a thought. There is no I am aware in awareness. So as I said earlier, that all the various states of consciousness always relate in some sense to your identity. Even if it's, I'm happy, that's your identity. I'm sad, now that's your identity. I am the witness, that's your identity. I am the stuff of all existence. Now that's a big identity. So all the movements of consciousness are actually fluid, changing senses of your own self, your own identity. So, in the way I language this stuff, I did a course last year on the experience of no self. And in that I talked about consciousness and made a distinction between consciousness as well. And I talked about consciousness being that when we move in the domain of no self, which is really what Nisargadatta is calling the absolute or awareness, that we lose self-consciousness. The consciousness is always a form of self-consciousness. I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm good, I'm bad, I'm God, I'm an ego, I am that, All these are various forms of identity. And the way Nisargadatta goes about teaching this is he's expanding your identity until it becomes universal. Because from the standpoint of consciousness, everything is consciousness. So it's completely universal. That's the ultimate I am. The truest sense of I am is not specific. It's generalized. It's everything in general. It's not limited to anything in particular. But it includes everything in particular. In awareness, there is no self-consciousness. It's actually the experience of no self. No self simply means no self-consciousness. And of course that can be momentary, a momentary experience, or it can be a continuous experience. No self actually means no self-consciousness. When Nisargadatta is talking about awareness, at least as I understand it, as in my reading, he's talking about something very, very similar to the state of no self, if not identical to the state of no self. And when he talks about consciousness, he's always talking about, he's using it in terms of some form of self-consciousness. Even if it's universal consciousness, even if it's I am God consciousness. And he utilizes that in his teaching. He encourages that in his teaching by dwelling on the sense of I am and letting it completely unfold its potential, which is infinite. And then, paradoxically, going beyond it into an odd state. It's not really a state, but you kind of run out of words of how to language this, into what's actually kind of an odd state, a state beyond self-consciousness. Or as Nisargadatta says, beyond I amness. So in awareness, in the absolute, you're not sitting there saying to yourself, I am the absolute, because it just doesn't make sense anymore. I am statements don't really have relevance from that place, because they're beyond all self-consciousness. They're beyond the I am. Now, this basic state of awareness, this absolute reality, is actually in every single experience. This infinity of awareness, of pure potentiality, is actually what every experience unfolds within. And every experience is a manifestation of it. As Nisargadatta says, as long as there's a body, there'll be some rudimentary sense of self-consciousness or I amness. I amness goes along with the body. Before there's any body, there's no sense of I am, is there? As we say in Zen, who were you before your parents were born? It's a great question, though. Who were you before your parents were born? Who were you before you were born? It's not trying to get you necessarily to imagine before birth. It's trying to get your consciousness out of time. Because who or whatever you were before you were born is who or whatever you are right now. And it's not a self. And it's not self-consciousness. Because self-consciousness, in its most rudimentary form, begins in your very early life. There's no self-consciousness before you're in your mother's womb. And so keep in mind that this teaching of Nisargadatta is about awareness, or what he calls the Absolute, and what I call no self. It's a very advanced teaching. This is why it's difficult. Because the Absolute is beyond all description. Period. It's not big, it's not small, it's not I am, it's not right, it's not wrong, it's not good, it's not bad, it's not holy, it's not mundane, it's literally beyond description. All of those descriptive qualities, we might be able to attribute some of them to consciousness, but we cannot attribute them to absolute awareness. There's a quote that I think I put here, at least I hope I did. The jnani which is a word for enlightened being, I guess, knows himself to be the immovable center of the movable, the eternal witness of the transient. The center is a point of void, and the witness a point of pure awareness. They know themselves to be as nothing. They know themselves to be as nothing. And it's not nothing in the sense of what your imagination might think nothingness is, because that's an idea too, that's an image too. He's using nothingness in the sense of something that's completely beyond imagination. Nisargadatta also talks about the Absolute as a place beyond all knowing. Whereas consciousness can be known. It can be known. The ego can be known. I am the witness can be known. I am that. I am the unity of all things can be known and can be experienced. You can know yourself as those various dimensions of consciousness. Awareness cannot be known, because awareness is what knows all the dimensions of consciousness. That's how the dimensions of consciousness can be known, because they're known by awareness. Awareness has nothing behind it. Awareness is the final and ultimate truth. It's the final and ultimate reality. Therefore, it can't know itself, because it can't get apart from itself to know itself, to look at itself, to experience itself, to look and go, hey, that's what I am. It is the ultimate unknown. So if you try to know consciousness in the same way you try to know just about everything else, you can never, ever know it that way. As paradoxical as this sounds, the only way you can know it, know the Absolute, is through a state of unknowing. You know it by unknowing it. And I know that sounds probably ridiculous. In the Christian tradition, they have a whole book called The Cloud of Unknowing, which is basically about the practice of entering into a state beyond all knowing, beyond all ideas, beyond all concepts, beyond all experiences. I would also add beyond all states of consciousness, beyond knowing. It's sort of like your eyeball can never turn around quick enough to get a look at itself. It can never know itself that way. Your eyeball can't know itself in the same way that you can know the computer screen that you're looking at. You can know the computer screen because it's something you're looking at. Your eye can't turn around and look at itself. The The Absolute can't turn around and look at itself. Everything exists within it. It can't turn around and look at itself. But it can know itself in a different way. In the same way your eye can notice itself as the looking. It can't look at itself, but it can notice itself to be the looking. Awareness can't look at itself either. It can't know itself as an object. But it can know itself as the knowing. As the immovable awareness of each and every experience, of each and every and this includes spiritual experiences as well. Because Nisargadatta does also attribute changelessness to the Absolute, to absolute awareness. And ultimately, what he's pointing to here is saying, look, everything except the Absolute can and will and does change. The Buddha taught that 2,500 years ago. That the nature of the world is impermanence. The nature of your entire human experience is impermanence. It's always moving. The nature of consciousness is impermanent. So you have some great spiritual, great big revelation one day, and then a week later you wonder where it went, or you're trying to get it back, or you're trying to hold on to it. And Nisargadatta would come up and go, no, why are you doing that? You're trying to hold on to something that's by its very nature is changeable. Consciousness is like water. It's fluid, it's dynamic. Consciousness is actually the most amazing creative force in the entire universe, because everything is consciousness. But it's this completely fluid, dynamic, changing, ever remolding itself. And so it's some experience one moment, it's a different experience the next moment. You have some great spiritual experience, and your consciousness expands to the outer galaxy. And then, the next thing you know, you're just sitting there eating breakfast at the table. And it seems quite ordinary. And your mind might say, my God, that state of expanded consciousness, that was the truth. Mostly based on the fact that it was just so extraordinary. Nisargadatta would come in and say, well, that's a very nice expanded state of consciousness you had going there, but don't attribute it to absolute truth. If it wasn't there yesterday, and it's not there today, it can't be truth. The absolute truth is what always is. You can't lose it, and you can't gain it. You can't lose it. You can lose every experience you will ever have. And you will lose every experience you ever have. When you go to sleep at night, you lose all the experiences of the day. You become unconscious of them while you're in deep sleep. But you cannot lose your absolute nature. This is why Nisargadatta, as many others, have said that the Absolute is beyond all experience. It's beyond that which changes. So as a point of contact, because this is what I'm interested in, because I know all this can start to sound hopelessly abstract. I understand that, and far away. And believe me, whether I'm doing a good job or not, I'm trying to make it as the least abstract that I possibly can. But it's extremely difficult for this stuff to not sound abstract and hopelessly paradoxical. All of that I understand. But as a point of contact, just start with the sense that there is, in the experience, whatever experience you're having right now, there's something that's noticing that experience. And it's not a witness, it's not a little thing in there, but there's something that's noticing this experience at this moment. In fact, the noticing doesn't come from a particular point. The noticing is all about this experience. this moment. The knowing of it, this moment, arises from all over. So there's something about this moment that's not an experience. That's not up, that's not down, that's not happy, that's not sad. It's not boring emptiness either, because boring emptiness is another experience. Emptiness is another experience. There's something about this moment that's not an experience. I can't tell you what it is, because as soon as I tell you, then it becomes a definition. It becomes something that your mind then looks for. But that which is not an experience is what Nisargadatta is calling absolute awareness. And the changeableness of within experience, the experience changing, and your sense of identity, whether it's very small or very great, that fluid, dynamic sense of your own being, sense of yourself, that is consciousness. So in that which never changes, there's no sense of self. Whether small or big, it's beyond self altogether. It's what I call no self, but that's to state it negatively, because I wouldn't even know how to state it positively, because that would form a new image. But then again, every description will form an image. And within that is this malleable, fluid consciousness. This fluid sense of your own being. So I hope that helps. I told you this was going to be a difficult subject. It's challenging. Nisargadatta doesn't really, all Nisargadatta says is dwell in the sense of I am. Dwell in the sense of I am. Let it develop, let it fully come to its biggest point of revelation. Just dwell in the point of I am, and by doing that, that will take you beyond it. That's basically his teaching method. He doesn't really go on to say, here's how to realize the absolute beyond saying, dwell in the sense of I am. Just dwell in consciousness. Be the presence of consciousness. And in due course, that will take you beyond. Because in due course, you'll see that you cannot define yourself as anything you can see, because there's always something that sees it. You cannot define yourself as anything, great or small, spiritual or unspiritual. You can't define yourself as anything you experience, because ultimately, that experience, there's something that notices that experience. When I say something, I don't mean some other entity outside of it, but there's some quality of every experience, of every perception, that's completely unchanged. And it is unconditioned. And as Nisargadatta said, it's unborn. Unborn, undying, uncreated. That's why sometimes Nisargadatta will say things like, you were never born, you don't exist, you won't die. He's trying to push your realization deeper into the absolute. The absolute is that in which birth and life and death happen.